Hello and welcome to this episode of the Coding Dojo. In this video, we're going to go through how to build a password manager, a basic password manager in Python. This is a multi-part episode or issue, I guess. So the end result, we're going to build something that looks like this right here. So we have, this is a password manager that I built, and we have options to encrypt and decrypt files, which we're not going to get to in this issue. We'll get to that later. But down here in the bottom, we have a basic password manager. So, for example, if I wanted to store something like google.com with my username of Sensei Scott, the password, here I could input a password or generate a secure password. So I'll take that one and then any notes that I wanted to. So from there, I can store it. And what we'll see is from this search site, we now have google.com. We'll show our username and our hidden password and notes. We can unhide it with the flashlight here. And it also is in our clipboard, so we can easily paste it into the site that we're trying to log into. So we're going to go through the basics of how to do that in this video. We're going to go through how to add items to the database, as well as retrieve items from the database. So we're not going to need that anymore. But to get started, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. So I'm going to open this in VS Code. And let's go ahead and create a new file. And we'll call this password manager. And get that extension. All right, so now we have our Python file. First thing we're going to need to do is do our imports. So one of the imports we're going to use is SQLite. So we're going to import SQLite3 as SQL. And one of the other imports we're going to need is Paperclip. And what this is going to do is it allows us to copy something to our clipboard. So I'm going to import Paperclip. If you do not have that installed, you'll have to pip install it through your command line, which I showed in the first video. So if you need help on that, go ahead and check that out. So we'll have SQLite and Paperclip. So the next thing we're going to do is, as I said, we're going to have a function to add members. Just kind of giving an outline here, so I'll just do nothing there. And we're also going to have one for retrieving members. So what this will do is, obviously the first one will be to add new credentials to the database, and the second one will be able to retrieve receive the stored credentials. So we'll need a main driver for our application. I'm just going to do it in the main statement. So if underscore underscore name equals main. So now we have our main driver there. So what we'll need to do first is create a connection to the database. So I'm going to go ahead and just make this a little bigger here for a sec. So first I'm going to do con equals sql.connect. And the database we're going to connect to is going to just be called pwm for password manager.database. And then we're also going to create a cursor. And information on all of this was in issue number 2, I believe. So check that out for questions on any of this database connection stuff. And once we have the connection, first what we need to do is create the database table if the database table doesn't exist. So we don't want to create it every time. We only want to create it if it doesn't exist. So you could almost make the assumption that, if this file exists, then the table exists. But we're just going to do it through a SQL command to show you that. So we're going to do c.execute, and I like to do the triple quotes here, and give us some space. So what we're going to do is, in this command, we'll do create table if not exist, and then PWM. So this will create the table if it doesn't exist. So it'll create this PWM table if it's not already in this PWM database. So then we'll need three fields. So we'll do, for now, we'll do site char, and I'll give it 100. We'll also need the username as a char. I'll give that 100 as well. And then lastly, we'll need the password. And it looks like it knew already there. So I'm using Kite, which is like a machine learning auto completion tool, which is pretty sweet. So do recommend that. Check that out. But yeah, so we have the site, the username, and the password. And in the future videos, we'll add the notes field. We're going to leave that off for now. All right. If you do want to add it, you can. We're not going to do anything with it, but you can go ahead and say notes char, and then maybe use like 300 or 500 or something. Whatever you think is necessary. So that's just any notes like maybe you have an additional password phrase, or maybe it's complicated login instructions or something like that. You can store them in the notes field. But like I said, in this video, we're not going to do that. So I'm just going to stick with the 3. So this will create our table if it doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and just try this, make sure it works. So I'm going to save, and Control F5 will run it. And let's see, so it looks like we have a syntax error. That should be plural for exists. And there we go. So now we should see on the left here, pwm.db was created, which was executed here in this statement. So sweet. So that'll create our database and also the table inside the database if it doesn't exist. Next thing we're going to do is just basically loop through a user input dialog for them to be able to either add, retrieve, or edit and delete. So we'll add the availability, but we won't add the features in this video. So we'll do that in the next video, but first we'll just do the add and retrieve. So our action is going to be blank, and then we're going to just do a while true loop. And then what we're going to do is get a input. So the action is going to be, actually we don't need that action there. The action is going to be input of, so first I like to do some line separation. So I'll just do an equal sign 45 times. And then I'll also do a new line here. And so our options are going to be to add, retrieve, edit, delete, and quit. So those are going to be our options, and I'm going to convert that to lower so I don't have to check for multiple cases. And then now what we're going to do is just basically if action is A, then we're going to do, we're going to execute our add command, else if action equals R, we're going to retrieve, so if action equals E, we will edit, and lastly, if it's D, we're going to delete. Well, really, lastly is quit. So else if action equals Q, and quit. And then as a catch-all, we will print invalid menu choice. So now we kind of have the main driver here of the program. We'll see edit and delete because we didn't actually create those. So so we can go ahead and do that up here as well. Edit. So we're not actually doing this in this video, as I mentioned, so we're just going to leave it blank for now. So it works. All right, so this will be in the next issue. All right, so that's kind of the main driver here for our application. Just a few other things here. Since we'll be committing things to the database in the add function, and we'll also be retrieving information from the database, we will need to pass in our cursor, so the C. So I'm just going to go ahead and accept that as a parameter for both of those. Well, we'll really need it for all of these, but like I said, not focusing on these, so I'm going to leave them blank right there. We'll need them for the add and the retrieve here. Sweet. So now we have our add, we have our retrieve, and we have our main loop. So just to test some stuff out, let's go ahead and print out add, retrieve. So we can go ahead and run that, pressing Control F5. So now you'll see at the bottom here, we have this little menu, so I can say A, and we get add, say R, we get retrieve, edit and delete won't do anything, and then Q will exit our program. Well, yeah, that's because it's the built-in, but let's do, we'll just do a break there. Probably better, because we might need to do some cleanup afterwards. So this break will just exit out of this while true statement. So let's go ahead and just, for sanity, run that again. Cancel that. Let's try that again. There we go. So add, retrieve, edit, delete, quit. So quit ends it for us, just as expected. If I was to try that again, run it again, and say I put in, something, not supported, we'll get invalid menu choice. So everything looks like it's working there. So now we can go ahead and add these additional fields here. So for the add, this one's going to be pretty straightforward. Basically, we'll just need some input from the user, a site, a username, and a password, and then we'll store that to our database. So in the add function, we will need a username. Oh, well, first we'll need a site. Input site name to add. We will need a user. And let's just make this a little easier. Take away some of these. And then lastly, we will need our password. So once we get all three of these items, what we can do is just go ahead and store them into the database. So I can just do a basic c.execute, and then I will do here insert into PWM, the values, question mark, comma, question mark, comma, question mark. And then we'll need to pass in our values through a tuple where we can say site, user, password. So that's really all it is those 4 lines there, and we can add things to the database. So a couple of notes here. We don't have a primary key, like the site's not a primary key. This way you can decide if you want to add a login for multiple users for the same site. And also if we were to add in, a site twice, it would just add the site in twice and it wouldn't overwrite. So that's one of the ones we'll look at in the next issue when we do this edit, is if something already exists, we'll update it rather than add it. So here, as opposed to just straight adding it, first we'll check if it exists, and if it does exist, then we'll edit it rather than adding it. But since we're just doing add and retrieve, we're just going to leave it like this as a simple addition into the database. So again, we can run this, and looks like this needs to be in parentheses. And let's go ahead and try that again. And that needs to be a comma. All right, so if we did add, we'll say the site name. So it's Google, username is Sensei Scott, and Dojo. So it looks like I created the database when I added in that notes column. So let me just delete it real quick, and then I'll rerun this. Just delete that, and I will run it one more time. So it should create a new database here. So we can add Google, just simpler. There we go. So now we have added it to the database, but since we don't have a retrieve function, there's not really a way to see that yet. One thing you will notice off to the left here, there's this journal database file. And basically what that means is it's kind of like, how I think of it is like the cached changes to the database that haven't been committed yet. So if we were to just end this program, well, one, we didn't close our connection, so we're still going to see this journal, but we didn't actually commit anything to this database, so there's nothing actually nothing got stored. So what we need to do is whenever we add, edit, or delete, basically make a state change to the database, we need to commit that into the database. So what we can do is if action was in, if it's an A, an edit, or a delete, then we need to do con.commit. So that will commit things to the database. And then lastly, we also need to close the database. So once we exit out of this while loop, we can close our connection. So that will close our connection. So we'll commit our changes, and then we'll close our connection after the end of the loop. All right, so now we have add, and now we can focus on this retrieve statement. So a couple things we're going to do with the retrieve. We're basically going to prompt the user to input a site to return the credentials. But we're also going to allow the user to input nothing to see all the sites in the database. So what we want to do first is get the site from the user. So we can say input would be input site name to input site name or nothing to see all sites. So basically, if the user inputs nothing, we're just going to show all of our sites. So what we can do is if site equals nothing, then we're actually going to do another function here called show sites. I'm going to pass in that cursor. So let's go ahead and add in that function. So def show sites. And what we're going to do is we're going to get a result site equals c dot execute select site from WM. And we're going to sort it descending or ascending, so it's in alphabetical order. So that'll return all of the sites in the database. And then what we're going to do next here is we're going to say sites equals S0 for S in C.fetchAll. So basically this is going to turn our result, into a list for us to print out and iterate through. So now what we can do is for I site in enumerate sites, we can print an f string of I plus 1, so it starts at 1 and not 0. And then we can pass in the site there. So it'll basically just print out all the sites for us to view. And since after this step, we'll be getting user input based on what we've printed, we're just going to return sites so we can do some additional computation as needed. Say sites. So when we retrieve, we're going to return sites. And what we're going to do now is from this list, we're going to ask the user for the numerical index of the site. So our site is then going to be input, enter the number of the site to retrieve. All right, so then basically it's going to print out a list of sites, and we're going to be able to pick that site. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we look like. So first, retrieve, well, that was edit. If we retrieve, input the site, if we leave it blank, that'll give us nothing, and that's because this should say order by, not sort by. So let me try that one more time. So if we were to retrieve, we'll get nothing since we don't have any sites added yet. So let's first add a site. And now if we were to retrieve, we see Google there. So now we basically would input here, we would input 1. And then it would show us the site details of 1. As we add more, so let's say we did YouTube. I'll just do the same one. Now if we retrieve, we'll see them both. So that's kind of the purpose of not showing anything when we do the retrieve, because if we were to do it the other way, we can do retrieve, and I would input Google there, and it would just straight up return Google's data, or Google's credentials, rather. So what we need to do is, since we're checking for a site numerical number here, which is the index of this sites array that we passed through in this show sites function, we need to index that array and get the site from it. So we're going to do this in a try statement in case the user passes in an invalid, like a word or a number that's outside of the size of the array. So what we're going to do is say site equals sites, and then we're going to have to convert the user input of site to a number, and we're also going to have to subtract 1 since they start at 1 down here, but the index will start at 0. So that should return the site at that index. So we input it at 1, it would return Google. The next thing we're going to do, if we have an error here, we're just going to do nothing. So I'm just going to return and basically bring the user back to the main menu. So that's what's going to happen if it's blank. So if it is blank, they would then expect to be putting in a number, so we would have a site by then. So from here on out, we can kind of act as if we have a site either from this input or from this indexing of the array. So now what we can do is we can execute our query to get the credentials for that site. So c.execute, we're going to select star from TWM where site equals question mark. And then we could pass in the site, and you also need that additional comma at the end there. So that will execute the retrieval of the credentials for that site. Again, just a thing to note here, we're assuming that we're only going to have 1 login for each site. Because if you were to put in 2 Googles and the site was the exact same, it would return 2 values, which isn't what we're expecting. We're expecting just 1 return. So in the future videos, remember, if we were to add something that already exists, we're going to edit it rather than add a duplicate. So just something to be aware of there. So what we're going to then do is we're going to capture our credentials in c.fetchAll. Then we're going to see if the credentials are blank, meaning that the user put in an invalid site up here. So if credentials equals an empty array, then again, we're just going to return else. So if it wasn't blank, what we can do is then unpack the results from this credentials. And what that means is, since we're expecting credentials to have 3 parameters of site, username, and pass, what we can do is set site username and pass equal to credentials 0, because it'll be the first item, and this needs to be PW. Because credentials will basically be a list of tuples, and so we want that first tuple inside of the entire list of everything that it's fetching. So we can basically unpack that, because credential 0 is going to be site username password. We can unpack that straight away rather than referencing cred 0, 1 like that later on. It's just a little cleaner to unpack it now. So once we do that, we can first just print out the site and the username. So let's print out, do an F string. And I'm going to indent these so we can view it a little easier. So I'll do a tab there. And we're going to want to print the site. And let's see here. So let's say site equals site. And then we'll add a new line and a tab for the username. User. So that'll print out the site and the username, and I need to close that off. And then next what we're going to do is basically ask the user if they want to show their password or if they want it to remain hidden for security. So then we can do another action, input show password, and this will take in a Y or an N. So if action is Y, then we're going to print our password. So I'm just going to grab this for W, just like that. So that'll print our password, else we won't print our password. And let's just bring that to lower just in case they put in a capital number. So that's really it. One other thing that I mentioned is just throwing it in our clipboard. So let's do that right here after we print everything. So we can say piperclip.copy, and we'll just copy our password. All right, so that's it. So I saved it there. Let's go ahead and run this and see how we do. So if I go ahead and run it, looks like I was already running it, so let me quit that. Control F5. All right, so we got it here. I think we still have some stuff in our, yep, so we have Google and YouTube. So if I hit 2, I should see YouTube username. If I said show password no, and then that won't show my password, and I can paste, and there we got pass, which was our password. So let's try that again. Let's add one here, and I will do Facebook. Again, I'll just do Scott, and I'll do my secret password. Now if I retrieve, so I could say Facebook here, and straight away we'll get Facebook username. You can paste, I have it in my clipboard. I can also hit yes, and I can see it there. So again, let's do one more. Let's add, let's see, Twitter, Dojo, let's do whatever, Dojo. now retrieve, input nothing. We should see all of our items here: Facebook, Twitter, Google, and YouTube. I did sort it, but since it's a mix of capital and lowercase, it's sorting the capital, then it's sorting the lowercase. That's kind of what we're seeing there. And I put T, so which I meant to put 2, but I put T, so it just exits out to the main menu. So let's try that again. 2, we get Twitter, Dojo. I say, if I hit enter, it'll do nothing. And you'll see I have it in my clipboard there. So that's kind of the basics of the password manager here. In the next issue, we're going to look at editing and deleting some of the password or some of the credentials that we've stored. We also may look at the generation of secure passwords, and in the future we'll look at some of the encryption, so you can encrypt the database and encrypt other files as needed. So hopefully you learned something. Hopefully this was useful. If not, feel free to let me know in the comments. If so, let me know in the comments. So thanks, and I'll see you in the next issue.